Everybody says they want more opportunity, more money, more influence, more freedom, more impact. But nobody really talks about what happens when more actually arrives. Because expansion sounds exciting until you realize the life you prayed for may require a version of you you've never had to be before. More opportunity requires more responsibility. More visibility requires more confidence. More success requires more discipline. More influence requires more integrity. And sometimes the hardest part of growth isn't surviving the difficult season. It's realizing you've finally outgrown it. You spent so much time learning how to survive that now you have to learn how to expand. And that requires a completely different version of you. So maybe the question isn't, am I ready for more? Maybe the question is, have I built the capacity to hold what I'm asking for? Let's get into it. Welcome to Shou Talks, the house where we don't just talk about growth, we build it. Because awareness is the blueprint, intention is your foundation, and legacy, that's your keystone. Every episode invites you to a different room of the house where together we'll challenge the way we think, live, lead, and build. Today's room is the expansion room. And this room feels different because we're nearing the end of the becoming wing. We've entered this wing through discomfort. We've learned how to stop allowing failure to define us. We practiced patience when progress wasn't moving fast enough. We built resilience for the moments life tried to knock us down. And now we've reached expansion. Expansion is what happens when everything you've been learning starts requiring you to live a little differently. Because eventually, growth stops being about recovering from what happened to you. It becomes about preparing what's possible for you. And that's what we're going to dive into today. So let's define expansion, because I think we usually associate expansion with more. A bigger business, a promotion, more money, a bigger platform, a larger home, more opportunities, more followers, more recognition. And yes, those things can be evidence of expansion, but they're not expansion itself. Expansion is increased capacity. It's your ability to carry more responsibility without losing yourself, to walk into bigger opportunities without shrinking, to manage greater success without abandoning the habits that helped you build it, to enter new rooms without constantly questioning whether you belong there. Expansion isn't simply receiving more. It's becoming capable of holding more. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the biggest obstacle to expansion isn't opportunity. It's identity. You can spend years becoming comfortable with a particular version of yourself, the dependable one, the quiet one, the person behind the scenes, the person who doesn't ask for too much, who makes everyone else comfortable. And then growth starts asking you to become visible, to lead, to speak, to decide, to charge more, to ask for more, to take up more space. And then suddenly the thing you've been praying for feels terrifying, not because you don't want it, but because it requires you to release the identity you've kept safe. That's why expansion can feel uncomfortable, even when it's good. You're not necessarily losing yourself. You may simply be meeting parts of yourself you haven't needed yet. So before we go any further, ask yourself, where has my life grown, but my identity hasn't caught up yet? Where are you still behaving according to an old version of yourself? Where are you shrinking because bigger feels unfamiliar? Because before we can build anything, we have to become aware of what's really happening. I've been thinking about expansion a lot lately because I'm living through it. There was a time where I could describe everything I was doing pretty simply. I had my career, had my family, had a podcast, I had ideas, I had projects I cared about. And somewhere along the way, those ideas started becoming something bigger. The podcast wasn't just something I enjoyed doing anymore. The books weren't just books. The conversations I were having were not just conversations. The community wasn't just something happening around the work. I started realizing I wasn't creating a collection of random thoughts. I was building something. And if I'm being transparent, recognizing that was exciting, but it was also very intimidating. Because once you recognize the size of the vision, you also recognize the responsibility attached to it. I couldn't keep treating everything like a side project. I couldn't keep waiting until I felt completely ready. I couldn't keep saying, one day I'm going to, because eventually one day becomes today. And one of the biggest things I had to become aware of was this. I wasn't always waiting for opportunity. Sometimes opportunity was waiting for me to believe I was ready for it. There were things I wanted that I was simultaneously afraid to fully claim. Leadership, visibility, growth, building something bigger than myself. And I had to confront the fact that I couldn't ask for expansion while continuing to think small about myself. That awareness changed something for me because I realized maybe I'm not supposed to wait until I feel like the person who can carry the vision. Maybe carrying the vision is how I become that person. So if expansion is increased capacity, how do we actually build it? There are 3 truths I've been learning. Expansion will expose your current capacity. We love asking for more, but more has weight. More clients require better systems. More money requires better stewardship. More influence requires greater responsibility. More opportunities require stronger boundaries. More leadership, that requires harder decisions. More visibility requires the ability to survive being misunderstood. So sometimes when life begins expanding, it exposes the places where our systems haven't, our habits haven't, our boundaries haven't, our confidence hasn't, our emotional capacity hasn't. And that's not necessarily a sign that you're failing. It's information. Think about everything we've learned throughout the swing. Discomfort taught us not to run when things become unfamiliar. Failure taught us to use information instead of turning mistakes into identity. Patience taught us not to force the process. Resilience taught us we can recover. Expansion asks us to use all of it because growth doesn't eliminate pressure. It increases your ability to carry it. So instead of asking, why is this so hard? Try asking, what capacity is this season asking me to build? That question changes everything. You cannot expand and remain completely comfortable. Expansion requires space, and sometimes creating space means something has to go. Old habits, old routines, old expectations, old relationships, old definitions of success, even old versions of yourself. And I think this is where growth can become emotional because not everything you outgrow was bad. Some things were exactly what you needed for a particular season. Some relationships carried you. Some routines protected you. Some versions of yourself helped you survive. But something can have served you well and still no longer fit where you're going. That's maturity. Being able to honor what something meant without believing you have to carry it forever. We sometimes interpret outgrowing something as betrayal, but expansion doesn't require disrespecting your past. It requires refusing to live there. You can appreciate who you were while still becoming who you're supposed to be. Expansion requires intentional stewardship. Getting more isn't the goal. Stewarding more is. Because what's the point of building the life you wanted if maintaining it destroys you? What's the point of success if your relationships collapse? What's the point of influence if you've lost your integrity? What is the point of building something impressive if you don't recognize yourself inside of it? Real expansion isn't how much can I add? It's how much can I responsibly carry? There's a difference. Sometimes expansion means saying yes. And sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means working harder. Sometimes it means delegating. At times it means being visible. But it also can mean protecting your private life. Sometimes expansion isn't adding anything at all. It's creating systems, boundaries, habits, and support around what you've already built. Because awareness shows us what needs to change. Intention determines what we do next. One thing I've had to become much more intentional about is separating having a vision from actually building one. Because I can have ideas all day. And trust me, I have ideas. I can imagine the brand, the shows, the books, the events, the community, the experiences, the impact. I can see the finished house. But vision without structure eventually becomes chaos. And I've had moments where I've had to look at everything I was trying to carry and ask myself, am I actually building this or am I just adding things? Because those are not the same. Expansion forced me to become more intentional about my priorities, systems, where my time goes, what deserves my attention in this moment, and what can wait. That's difficult when you're excited about everything. Sometimes intentional growth means telling a good idea, not yet. Not because it isn't worthy, not because you're incapable, but because everything cannot be the priority at the same time. I've also had to get comfortable saying, I need help. I need structure. I need to learn this. I don't know how to do this yet. And that little word, yet, has become so important because expansion doesn't require me to already know everything. It requires me to be willing to become the person capable of learning what the next level requires. And I'm still learning that. I'm still building that capacity. But now I know that I don't need to shrink the version simply because I'm still growing into the person capable of carrying it. I just have to keep building intentionally. I want you to sit with these questions. Where in your life are you avoiding awareness? Is there opportunity where you're pretending you don't want because wanting it would require you to change? Is there a version of yourself you've outgrown but haven't released? Where have your intentions drifted? Have you been adding more instead of building better? Have you confused being busy with expanding? And finally, what decision do you need to make this week? Not next year, not when everything is perfect. This week. Maybe you need to say yes. Maybe you need to say no. Maybe you're like me and you need to just ask for help. Maybe you need to apply. Maybe you need to launch. Maybe you need rest. Maybe you need to finally admit, I want more from my life. And there's nothing wrong with that. Growth begins the moment honesty does. Before we leave the expansion room, I want to give you 3 things to carry with you. One habit to begin. Start doing a weekly capacity check. Ask yourself, what am I carrying? What actually requires me? And what can be delegated? What needs to be removed? And what capacity do I need to develop for where I'm going? Don't just manage your calendar. Manage your capacity. One mindset to adopt. I am allowed to grow beyond the version of me that other people are comfortable with. Write that down. Tell yourself again and again. You don't have to stay recognizable to people. You don't have to keep performing an outdated version of yourself simply because other people understand that version better. Growth will change you. It's supposed to. One excuse to leave behind. I'm not ready. And you might not be. But readiness isn't always something you feel before you begin. Sometimes readiness is built through repetition, through experience, through failure, through discomfort, through patience, through resilience. Sound familiar? Everything we've walked through in this wing has been preparing us for this room. Awareness gave you the blueprint. Intention is how you begin building. And now I want you to think beyond yourself because eventually every room we build becomes a part of something larger. So ask yourself, if expansion became the way you lived every day, what kind of legacy would you build? Not expansion rooted in ego, not more for the sake of more, but expansion rooted in purpose. What happens when your growth creates opportunity for other people? When your courage gives someone else permission to try? When the business you build employs people? When the story you tell helps somebody heal? When the boundaries you create change what your children believe is normal? When your willingness to become more changes what's possible for the people coming behind you? That's when expansion becomes legacy. Because your growth was never supposed to end with you. The goal isn't simply to build a bigger life. It's to become capable of building something bigger than yourself. Every room in this house teaches us something different, but none of them stand alone. This becoming wing has been proof of that. Discomfort stretched us. Failure taught us. Patience slowed us down long enough to trust the process. Resilience taught us how to rise. And expansion showed us why all of that work mattered. Because becoming isn't just about surviving difficult seasons. It's about developing the capacity to step into bigger ones. But before we leave this wing, there's one final thing we have to do. We have to look back at every room we've walked through and ask, who did I become along the way? And that's where we're going next. The becoming integration room. Because lessons don't transform your life simply because you heard them. They transform your life when they become a part of how you live. Awareness helps us see. Intention helps us build. Legacy is what remains when we're gone. And expansion? Expansion is what happens when you finally stop asking whether you're allowed to become more and start building the capacity to do it. If today's conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you something to reflect on, share it with someone who's building their own house. Be sure to follow Shou Talks so you never miss a room. And remember, awareness is your blueprint. Intention is the foundation. Legacy, that's your keystone. Until next time, protect your peace, honor your growth, and keep building your house. I'll see you in the next room.